please discuss the Swiss Tropical Public Health Institute study describing the impacts to memory after a year of cell phone use?
This was a very important study. It is actually a replication study. So what they did is they took hundreds of school children, I think it's 7th to 9th grade. They assessed their use. They did memory tests, and then they did memory tests a year later. The kids who had the phone to their head more often had decreased test scores related to memory. And these memory tests were very specifically designed to look at the part of the brain that was most affected, that absorbed the most radiation from the way the kids use the phone. So these are teenagers. Teenagers' brains are more vulnerable than adult brains. They're still developing, still myelinating. There are so many reasons to protect children and teenagers. And I think, just 15 years ago, 20 years ago, who could have imagined that our teenagers would be using phones as much as they're using phones? I mean, when I got my first phone, I was pregnant and I got it because for safety, right? I worked, I had a very bad car and my husband was like, you need a phone for safety. So I got that cell phone for safety. But now and never, what would a teenager need a phone for? You wouldn't even know why would they need a phone? But now kids are being raised on phones. Babies are handed phones as toys in the grocery store everywhere we go. Saturated our life, and if it's damaging the brain, and this study shows makes a connection between impacts to memory, and it corroborates studies on animals and other studies in humans that have shown impacts to the brain. This, to me, is one of the most important issues related to cell phone and wireless radiation, and that is the impact to the brain. Because, how many IQ points are okay to lose for this technology? Are we really okay with that? Are we okay with what we are talking about here, which is brain damage? I remember, when with lead, I'm sure there was a time, and it was argued for a long time, it's only impacting certain populations, or, a little bit is okay. Well, now we know that there is no safe level of lead. Entire cities' water systems are being redone to protect communities and address the issue of lead. And yes, we have a long way to go because there are a lot of people still living with lead in their water. And there are, elected officials or prior elected officials that are being sued, and there's a lot of litigation going on. What I'm trying to say is when it comes to our technology, I'm often told, oh, that's too much work. Oh, we could never make all those changes. It's everywhere. And I'm thinking, well, lead is everywhere. And we know what the right thing to do is with lead, because we certainly wouldn't want to mess with a child's brain or a baby's brain. So here we are in the same place with our technology, and we really need to urgently address this. I think the easiest thing is for schools, like step one, all the new builds should be hardwired. Why not? I mean, you're building it, you might as well get it all in place. Otherwise, it's going to cost so much money to retrofit later, because this is happening. I'm not going away. All the hundreds and thousands of people working on this are working on it day and night, because we know that we want to be on the right side of history. We want to fix this for our kids. So
what happened to advocacy regulatory groups like the Interagency Radio Frequency Group? Why have scientific studies not resulted in shifts in policy?
Money is why we're not seeing the policy changes that are needed in the United States. It all comes down to following the money. But let me back up a minute to the Radio Frequency Interagency Work Group, which you just asked about. Many years ago, the United States government and many of our federal agencies had experts who were working in the issue of bioelectromagnetics, studying how humans are impacted, studying the propagation of the waves. This is a complex science, and it requires a level of expertise. In many of the federal agencies, there was one or several experts, and they were part of the radio frequency interagency work group. However, as far as we know, over the years, that work group has had less and less anything. We don't have any notes. We don't have meeting agendas. They have no authority. In fact, back in the 90s and the early 2000s, staff members in that group wrote the IEEE, wrote about how our FCC limits that we adopted were inadequate to protect public health. They said things like, that we have these letters online where they spoke about problems with the safety limits. I don't even like to call them safety limits, the guidelines that we have that the United States has adopted. And yet these letters were unanswered. And now we do not know the status of that group, except I will add that according to a letter from the EPA head of radiation and air to myself, I wrote a letter last year, this group has not met in over 2 years. So we don't believe that this group is actually active or doing anything. And even if they were, they didn't submit to the FCC any opinion on our safety limits. One other thing that many people are unaware of is that the Environmental Protection Agency, way back in the 90s, was in the process of developing safety limits, federally developed safety limits, looking at what's a safe level. What's a safe level in regards to the heating effects? What's a safe level in regards to modulation? And they were defunded. They were defunded, and they did not ever set limits. So what happened was the FCC adopted limits from industry-connected groups, and limits which were based on, as I said earlier, science from even 10 years prior. So it seems like what we need is a full review of the science by people with expertise and without affiliations or undue influence by the wireless industry and telecom.